Dive in this morning to the Word of God. We're jumping back into a little short kind of mini series that we began last week, just looking at the character of Elijah and his life and kind of some amazing things, honestly, that we can learn from his life. And so as we begin today, we jump back into that series. I want to start with a question, and it's kind of a loaded question. Would you say, think about your life, would you say that you are someone that has an issue or a problem with idolatry? Anybody in the room? Here's the spoiler alert, folks. You do. Welcome to True North. We're here for all the positive, encouraging love here this morning. You do have a problem with idolatry. And I think the best way for me to help you understand that is just to give you a definition of that. I think one of the best definitions I've ever heard is by a guy by the name of Timothy Keller. If you've never heard of Tim Keller, he is a guy who's been well known over the last 20 plus years, just passed away a year or two ago, but was a great man of God. And I love this definition that Tim Keller gives. Look at what he says. He says, an idol is anything. Let me say that again. An idol is anything that absorbs our heart and imagination more than God. Anything we look to give us what only God can give us. So let me ask you that question again. Is there anybody here who has a problem with idolatry? Every hand should go up in the room. Every one of us, right? Every one of us has certain things in our life that we are tempted to believe if I put my faith and my hope and my trust in that thing, it will give me what only God can actually give me. The truth is that we are living in a culture that this culture we've allowed our hearts to just be totally absorbed by idols. And what I have recognized in my own life is that there is this constant battle. You know, all summer long, I don't know how many of you have a yard, but I have a yard. And all summer long, I'm pulling weeds out of my stinking yard. Like every day, it's nonstop. There's always another one that pops up, right? And in the same way, when it comes to the idols in our heart, the things that we've allowed to absorb our heart, there is this constant process of pulling those idols out. It never ends, right? Because there's always another one popping up that's trying to absorb our heart, right? And so we've got to root those things out. Well, about 3,000 years ago, this guy by the name of Elijah comes on the scene in Israel. And the Israelite people have gone very far astray from worshiping the one true God. They have allowed idols to absorb their hearts. And what I want us to see today as we jump back in and study his life out here is that Elijah really came on the scene for one reason and one reason only: to help the people of God turn their hearts back to the one true God, to remove the idols of the land that were, running rampant in that day, and to get their eyes refocused on who he is, worshiping him. And I believe today in this culture that we live in, Elijah's life from 3,000 years ago is still just as relevant and important for us today to study and understand. And so I've been really just excited about this message all week long as I've studied this out and allowed it to honestly just impact my own heart. Man, I believe it's going to encourage somebody here this morning and hopefully challenge and convict us also at the same time. So just a quick recap of week one, if you don't remember from last week, or if you're joining us for the very first time, the story of Elijah is actually found in the book of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. It's only 5 chapters in the entire Old Testament is where you find Elijah, right? And so we began in 1 Kings chapter 17 last week. We're going to be jumping in to a little bit of the end of 17 and then really mostly in chapter 18 this week. But just so we can kind of recap and get the Cliff Notes version of what was happening for context, right? God has called Elijah to go to this wicked king named Ahab. And he goes to Ahab and he says, hey, listen, there's going to be this drought. There's going to be this massive drought that's going to last a long time. And the reason this drought is coming is because you have strayed from God and you have led the people of God away from him. You have worshiped the Baals, B-A-A-L. These were these gods that they worship, these false gods, right? You have fallen prey and captive to idolatry. And so Ahab, I'm telling you right now, man, if you don't turn, this drought's going to last a long time, right? And so eventually what happens is the Lord sends Elijah into the wilderness, into this place called the Kerith Ravine. He spends months and months there. Ultimately, then he ends up in this town called Zarephath, where he is with this widow who God uses her to provide for him food and sustenance, right? During this time of drought, there's no food anywhere because water is there's no water, there's no rain, right? And so Elijah finds himself kind of in this wilderness time of his life, right? providing for his needs is this widow. And then eventually, right, we're going to move on from this section here. And while in Zarephath, we're going to kind of, I don't have time. The reality is I don't have time to go through every single section of 1 Kings here in Elijah's life. So what I'm going to challenge you to do today is this. Go home this week, read this out for yourself. What I do want to do is summarize, again, just for context so we understand what's going on here. So in verses 17 to 24, it tells us that Elijah actually becomes the first of only 5 people to raise somebody from the dead. Did you know this? Right? There's only 5 people in all of Scripture who actually raised someone from the dead. The first was Elijah. He's the very first to do this. He raises, this widow's son actually gets ill. He dies. Elijah raises him from the dead. The second one is Elisha, who is Elijah's, the guy who kind of follows up Elijah in his prophetic ministry, right? Then after that, I think we know this name, Jesus, right? Raises some people from the dead, right? But then also, after Jesus, we find Peter raising someone from the dead and Paul raising someone from the dead, right? So when we talk about like, man, why is Elijah so revered by the Israelite people? This is one of those reasons, right? Dude raised somebody from the dead. That's the kind of power that God had through his life. And really, it's a testament to his faith and his anointing from the Lord. Look at what it says in verse 24. I'll just read you this verse. It says, then the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. This is what she said to him after he raised her son from the dead. And one quick note on this, as I read that this week, one of the things that kind of popped into my mind was, oftentimes we look at miracles in the Bible, we look at all of these amazing things that Jesus did, that the disciples did, that people like Elijah did, right? And I have talked about this many times, but I think it's so important for us to look at this. This is an example of this, right? Why does God do miracles? Why does he do miracles? It is always to prove and to show his power. It is to authenticate who he is. And that's exactly what's happening here. This woman sees what Elijah does and she goes, man, I know you are from God. There's no possible way you could have done that if you weren't, right? And so she now believes in God, right? So it tells us after what must have seemed like forever, God finally came calling, right? Elijah's been gone now, out in the wilderness. And look at what it says in 1 Kings 18, 1 through 2. It says, after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. And so Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. So it tells us it's been a long time since he has been out there in this wilderness kind of land. And then it gives us a specific number, 3 years. That's how long it's been. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Just how long of a time period that is. Now, 3 years can sometimes feel like it flies by, but 3 years can sometimes feel like an eternity, right? When you are waiting for God to do something in your life, how long does 3 years feel? Like forever. Like, God, come on. When are you going to finally call me to do what you've called me to do? Or when are you going to resolve this situation, right? And so finally, after 3 long years of drought, and remember, there's been this drought for 3 years, God does come calling. He calls Elijah to go essentially and do what I called you to do. Finish what you started, right? And so as Elijah is making his way towards Samaria, again, still summarizing here, as Elijah's making his way towards Samaria, which is the capital of Israel at that time. Remember, we talked about this last week. Important contextual details here. There's a northern kingdom and there's a southern kingdom. The kingdom of Israel has split, right? Ahab is overseeing the northern kingdom, which they call Israel, and then there's a southern kingdom called Judah, right? The capital of that northern kingdom is Samaria. And so he's making his way to Samaria again to confront Ahab, right? As he's making his way there, he runs into this guy by the name of Obadiah. And I love Obadiah. He's kind of like a small footnote in the story of Elijah, but Obadiah is a man that we should look at and go, that's a guy I want to be like. And we're going to look at that here just for a quick second. So Obadiah is actually the palace administrator for Ahab. In other words, he just kind of oversees all of the affairs going on at the palace, right? Takes care of everything, makes sure everything's running smoothly, right? So he's a very important figure in the house of Ahab. And what we need to understand about him is that he has been unbelievably faithful to the Lord throughout this entire time, throughout this drought. When many others have turned to worship Baal, Obadiah has not. And we're going to see this here in a second. Look at what it says in 1 Kings 18:4. It says, while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each. and had supplied them with food and water. And so during this time of drought, Jezebel, and we talked about her a little bit last week, and let's talk about her a little bit more today. Jezebel has been up to no good. Jezebel has been rounding up all of the faithful prophets of God, and she has been putting them to death. Why? Because Jezebel doesn't just want to kind of push God to the side. She doesn't want to just push the God of Israel, Yahweh, to the side. She wants to eliminate him. She wants to wipe him off the face of the earth. She wants Baal and her gods and her idolatrous ways of living to rule and to reign. And so what does she start doing? She just starts rounding up everybody who talks, who says anything positive about God, all these prophets of the Lord, and she begins to kill them. What does Obadiah do? This is important. Check this out. It says Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in caves, 50 in each cave. And so he rounded up these prophets that were left, the ones that were left, and he found some caves to hide them in, to protect them and to keep them from Jezebel taking their lives, right? It goes on to tell us that the famine was so severe that at some point Ahab decided, I need to send Obadiah out to try to find some kind of food, sustenance, resources, right? There's no water. It says he had no food, nothing to supply food to his cattle, to his mules. And so he sends Obadiah out to see if there's any grass left anywhere. While he's out there, he runs into Elijah. Obadiah does, right? He runs into Elijah, and Elijah instructs him to go back and to tell Ahab, hey, listen, I'm coming. Tell Ahab the time of reckoning is here. Go back and let your boss know I'm on my way, and be prepared. Now, in what I think maybe would have been my natural response here, Obadiah is a little bit hesitant. Again, if you kind of study this out, read this out, he responds a little bit in fear here. Why do you think that is? Well, number one, he's been harboring all of these fugitives, right, in caves, right? And I think Ahab, right, has to have some inkling of that, right? And so he's like, I don't know if I want to go back and be the one to tell him that Elijah, his arch nemesis, his enemy for the last 3 years, is coming to see him. Not only that, but dude, Elijah, you just disappeared for 3 years, brother. What if I go back and tell Ahab that you're on your way and you do one of these little disappearing acts again? I'm going to lose my life, right? It's going to be off with my head, right? And so he kind of argues a little bit with Elijah. Hey, I'm not sure that I want to do this, but Elijah is so confident. Elijah's like, no, I'm going back to see Ahab. There's nothing that can stop me from doing that. God has called me to do that, and that is where I'm going, right? And so Elijah assures him, I'm coming. And so this is where we're really going to pick up the story today and see the amazing things that God does through Elijah's life. All right, so 1 Kings, if you're following along, chapter 18, starting in verse 16. It says, so Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. But you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and you have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. And so Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. And so first thing I want us to see here is, oh, how Ahab's heart has been twisted. He immediately, his first response when he sees Elijah coming is to do what? To blame him for the drought that has been going on in Israel. Look, Elijah's just the messenger. He's not the one who created this. Elijah very quickly pushes back. What does he say to him? Brother, I'm not the reason this is going on. All of this is going on because of your wickedness, because you have turned away from God, right? He makes it very clear this is Ahab's faults, right? Not only have you turned from the God of the universe, the one true God, to worship Baal, but you have allowed your wife, Jezebel, to make this essentially the national religion. Did you catch this? This is a very small detail, but I think this is an important detail. Look at verse 19. It says, now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Right? What does that tell us? Jezebel is funding false religion in their country. She's welcoming them in. She's paying them. She's letting them eat at their table, right? She has allowed them to completely infiltrate everything, including the government itself. It is now the national religion, is what he's saying. Ahab, this is wrong, man. This is so evil and so wicked. Again, this is your fault. And so what does he do? He says, gather all of your so-called prophets, because I'm going to show you how wrong you have really been. Verse 21, look at this. It says, Elijah went before the people then. Everybody gathers around. He says, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us, he says. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. And so they took the bull given them and they prepared it. And then they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. I want us to see this here. But there was no response. There was no response. No one answered, it says. And they danced around the altar that they had made. And so Elijah here begins by calling people out. What does he say to them? How does he call them out? He says, how long will you waver? The Hebrew word that's used there, it means to limp or to dance. How long, in other words, he's saying, how long will you limp along here worshiping a false God, teetering, sometimes wanting to worship the true God, sometimes over here wanting to worship these false gods? How long will you dance around this issue, right? That you are worshiping false gods when the one true God is calling you to worship him and him alone. How long, he says, will you waver, right? And so what Elijah does here is basically says, I'm going to do something to help you make that decision. Since you can't seem to figure this out, since you continue to waver here, let's have a little competition. Let's find out who's really God, right? That's essentially what he's doing here, right? Let's get 2 bulls, he says, and you can pick them. Go ahead. You choose them. You can go first. You and all your prophets, go ahead. Choose whichever bulls you want. We're going to cut those bulls up. We're going to make an offering. We're going to put it on the altar, right? And we're going to ask our God to call down fire onto that altar. And whichever God actually does it, we'll know which one is the one true God, right? Now, I love the sense of humor, if you will, of God here. Because we talked about this last week. Who is Baal, right? He's known as the sky god. He's the God who brings the rains. He's the God who brings lightning and thunder, right? And so your God, Baal, right? He should be able to bring a lightning bolt down and just light this thing up immediately. Like, this is what he does. Like, this is his specialty, right? And we're going to see in a moment, as we know, right? Baal doesn't answer. So they agree, right? They set everything up. They start calling his name. Baal, answer us, answer us, answer us. Crickets. Nothing. He does not respond. There's no response. No one answered. And I love this. Again, man, when you read scripture, anybody who says Bible's boring, anybody says that the Bible doesn't have anything fun or interesting or exciting in it, doesn't have humor in it, you haven't read it. You haven't read it. You gotta get into this. Look at this. Look at what Elijah says here. I love this in verse 27. He says, at noon, Elijah began to taunt them. He actually began to taunt them, right? He goes like kind of sarcastic Chandler Bing on them. If you know who that is, then awesome. If you don't, I can't help you today, okay? He goes super sarcastic on him. He says, shout louder. Just shout louder. Maybe he doesn't hear you. Maybe you just need to get more loud, right? Surely he is a God. Perhaps he's deep in thought. maybe he's just busy, right? Maybe he's traveling somewhere. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened, right? And so look at what it says. It says they shouted all the louder. They actually listened to him. They shouted all the louder. Then they start going crazy. They're slashing themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed, which was a very customary thing to do in that day. It says midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But I want us to see this again. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. And so Elijah hits him here with the straight sarcasm, right? Maybe you're not shouting loud enough, he says. Maybe he lost his hearing. I don't know. Like your great God, right? Maybe he's up there daydreaming about Aphrodite. Who knows, right? Maybe he's busy. Fun fact here on that word busy. Some translations say relieving himself. So what that word actually means when it says busy is he was busy doing his business, right? Maybe he's up there on the toilet going to the bathroom somewhere. Knock on the door, tell him we need him to come out, right? Maybe he's traveling, he said. Maybe he's on vacation down Cancun and that, catching some rays, right? Maybe he's gone off on a nice little trip, a nice little vacation away. Where is your God? Elijah says. Right? Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's taking a nap, right? But again, no response. No response. Their so-called God left them hanging. And so continue on here. Now look at this. Now let's see the one true God. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." And they came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he said, and they did it the 3rd time. It says that the water ran down around the altar, and it even filled the trench. Just to use your imaginations to picture this. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and he prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command." And then verse 37, "Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." And so Elijah begins his part of the competition here by doing what? And I think this is so profoundly important. It says that he rebuilds the altar. That the altar of the Lord had been torn down by Jezebel and her prophets. And he says, no, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rebuild the altar. We're going to rebuild the altar of the one true God to make this sacrifice, right? You erected your own altars, but I'm here to restore the altar of the living God. That's what I'm here for, right? And so then what does it tell us? It says he builds a trench, big trench around the altar, right? And he tells them, I want you to go and I want you to grab 4 large jars, and I want you to fill them with water, and I want you to dump it all over the altar. Just soak it, saturate it, put so much water on it that it actually fills the trench, right? He makes them do it 3 times, 12 of these huge, giant jars of water. Why is he doing that? He's making a point here. I want to make sure you understand that when my God does answer, and when he does bring fire down, there's no trickery here. I want you to know this thing is completely soaked. There's no way by any human means I could light this thing on fire right now. This isn't some magic trick, right? Lest anybody think that he might be manipulating the situation. That's why he does this. And so finally Elijah steps up and he says these powerful words. And I want to read these words again in verse 37. He says, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Why is God doing all of this? Why is Elijah doing all of this? So that the people would know that God is turning their hearts back to him again. He is a God who faithfully, over and over and over again, no matter how many times we turn away from him, turn our hearts away from him, he will continually call our hearts back to him. That is the goodness and the faithfulness of God, because he doesn't have to do that. And I want us to see that today. He doesn't have to do that. The people have completely rebelled. They have done wicked things. He could have wiped them off the face of the earth. It's not what he does. Look what happens next. It says, then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and they cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. It says they seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley, and he slaughtered them there. And so Elijah cries out, and unlike when the people of Baal cried out and cried his name, he didn't answer, right? God answers. He immediately answers the call, right? He cries out, the Lord answers, and I love this. He leaves no doubt that it is truly God. What do you see here? It says, not only does the fire come down and burn up the meat, right? The bull, it burns up all of the wood, gone. It says it burns up the stones themselves. Do you know how hot a fire has to be to burn up stone? It completely incinerates them. It says even the soil that was around in the trench is burned up, and every last drop of water is completely consumed. It says it's licked up, right? There was absolutely no doubt that this was God. He showed up in a big way. And in that moment, at least for a moment, what does it tell us? That the people's hearts were turned back to God. They saw the faithfulness of God. They saw the power of God on display. And in that moment, what does it say? They began to worship him. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And in that moment, what does Elijah do? Well, once he knows that the people are kind of back on his side, at least for that moment, the very first thing he does is say, round up all of these guys. All of these prophets, all of these people who were leading everybody astray, and put them to death. We're going to talk about that in a moment here. The seriousness of leading others astray, leading others to worship false gods, man, it is a serious, serious thing. He says they need to be put to death. They need to be taken out, right? And so we read this story, and it's an awesome story. And we see the power of God, and we see Elijah's obedience. We see all of that. But I want to get back to the heart of what's really going on here as we kind of apply this to our lives today. What can we take away from this here? Several thousand years later, I think it's still so applicable to us. The issue Elijah is dealing with here, right? From the beginning, this is what we said, is a people whose hearts and imaginations have been completely absorbed by false gods. That's what's going on here. That's the real heart of the issue. That's the problem that God is addressing here, right? They believed at the end of the day that Baal would give them what only God could give them. That's what they believed, right? And so what did they do? They sought Baal for all the things that we seek to get from our idols: comfort, power, control, approval, right? Kind of these core things that we seek out in our lives. That's the reason every person turns to idols, because we want those things in our lives, right? Ultimately, I believe this, we seek those things because we want joy and we want contentment, and we think comfort and power and approval and control is going to give us all of those things. That's what we believe, right? But when they cried out to their God, little g, let me say this again. There was no response, was there? No one answered. No one paid attention. And this is the message today. And this is what I want us to hear. Again, I said this last week because I love you, because you are my people, because I have been called to be your shepherd. Please hear me today. Somebody needs to hear this desperately today. Idols never answer. They never answer. They never answer. And if they do answer, it's a lie. It tells you something that you want to hear, but it ultimately is leading you down a path and down a road to destruction. Idols never answer. They never give anything back. Please hear that today. You chase that thing thinking it's going to give you what God can only give you, and you believe it's going to give you something in return. And it might for a moment, but it won't last. Idols never truly actually give anything back, right? They only end up taking from us. That is the truth. They will only ever steal and destroy and take from us, right? They steal joy. They leave us empty. They leave an insatiable desire for more. They deceive. That's what idols do. Don't believe the lie. And yet, here's what's crazy to me. I think the vast majority of us in this room, especially if you are a follower of Jesus and you've been a Christian for any length of time, you know that. I'm not telling you something you don't know today, right? And the reality is, look at the nation of Israel. How many times over and over and over again are they dealing with this same exact issue? And there are times, I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like I talk about this idolatry thing, this false worship thing a lot here. But you know what? We need to keep talking about it. We need to keep talking about it. I need to keep reminding myself of it. Why? Because it is like a weed. It does just continue to pop up, and we got to continue to weed it out and pull it out, right? And so Elijah is just one in a long line of prophets who've come along and is saying, stop doing this. Stop worshiping these false gods, these idols who will never bring you anything that you are really looking for, right? And so there's this rampant problem of idolatry in our world, I think, even amongst Christians. And what I want us to see today is, how did God use Elijah to turn their hearts back to him? Because ultimately, here's what I want to do. I want to look at Elijah's life, and I want to encourage us to turn our hearts back to him if they're not fully there right now. And I mean that, fully there. I believe this about you today, church. If you're a follower of Jesus, I believe there's a huge part of you that wants to follow God, that wants to worship him and him alone, that doesn't want idolatry to creep into your heart. And yet it does. And so if I love you and I care about you, we'll talk about this, right? And so number one, let's look at this. How did God use Elijah to turn their hearts back to him? Number one, I encourage you to mark this down. He revealed the problem in their hearts. That's where it starts, guys. Right here. This is where all false worship, idolatry starts, in our hearts. He revealed the problem in their hearts. What did he ask them? Look at this again with me. How long will you waver, he said. How long will you waver? How long will you limp along worshiping God over here, but also worshiping all of these idols over here? How long are you going to do it? And that word limp, right? When you limp along, when you're limping, what are you doing? What's happening to you? You're being slowed down. You're crippled in a way, right? You're not walking in confidence, in power, in authority. You're just kind of limping along, right? When you're limping along through life, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think we would all say that's not good. We don't want to be limping along, right? He says, how long will you dance around making a decision? They are wavering. This is how I'm looking at it this week. They're wavering and they're torn between two altars, right? Elijah recreated that altar. He said, we're going to put the altar of the Lord back up. Tear the other one down. Build the altar of the Lord up. Tear this other one down. That's the one that needs to go. We're certainly not going to leave both of them up, because if you leave both altars up, I'm telling you what's going to happen right now. You're going to worship at both altars. There can only be one altar that we worship, and it is the worship of our God. Look at this. Let's just look at the words of Jesus for a second here. This verse just came to me this week like a thunderclap. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. You can't do it. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And you could fill in whatever word you want there where money is. You cannot serve both God and money. power, success, achievement, sex, relationships, whatever it is. You can't. You cannot do it. You will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and you will despise the other. And this is why God so vehemently calls us, you may only worship me and me alone. What is the first commandment, right? Let's just go back to the Old Testament. You shall have no other gods before me. There's a reason that that's number one, because there's such a propensity in the human heart to stray away from that, right? And so let me ask us today, church, how long will we waver? How long will we waver? How long will we limp along, dance around, make excuses ultimately for the idols in our life? I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to make excuses for the idols in my life, right? The bottom line is God isn't looking for lukewarmness in our life. He's not looking for a lukewarm heart. He's looking at us. Elijah's looking at the people. God's looking at us and he's saying, make a decision today. Choose this day whom you will serve. Is it me or is it your idols? And I think that's a question we got to wrestle with. We have got to wrestle with that. We've got to root those idols out, right? So number one, he reveals the problem in their hearts. You're wavering. That's the problem. That's the human condition. Are you wavering? And then he says this, right? He helped them see that God is the only one who does answer, right? If idols never answer, we have to recognize God is the only one who does, right? When Baal was called, right? What happened? He was powerless, right? What does it say? There was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention, right? He was completely powerless to give anything to them that they actually desired, right? He just left them feeling totally empty, right? But when the Lord is called upon, what happens? He answers, right? With power and authority, right? His fire consumed everything on that altar, right? Only the Lord, don't miss this today, has the power to change things, to truly transform things, to truly fill us to the fullness, to bring his fire on our lives and ignite the flame that all of us are so desperately seeking and looking for, right? Many people, so many people, and maybe there's somebody in this room today, you are in this boat, you are searching for answers from gods that will never deliver. That's where you're at. And so again, I want to ask this question, where are you believing that lie? Where are you believing that lie? That thing that you have chased after, that idol that you have made number one in your life, that is going to give you what only God can give you. And then finally, what did he do? He eliminated the temptations that led them astray. Right? Number one, he revealed the problem in their hearts. Guys, we got a heart issue. Number two, he says, God is the answer to that heart issue, to that void, to that hole that you are searching for. And finally, he says, and now we got to eliminate the temptations that are leading us astray. Look at this. What did the prophets of Baal do? They were leading the whole nation astray. They were like a cancer, just a plague in Israel, right? They did nothing but tempt and deceive and lead astray. And Elijah's move here at the end of all of this, at the end of this little competition, feels very radical, doesn't it? He's like, kill them all. Get rid of them. They are a problem. And if you don't get rid of them, guess what's going to happen? They're going to keep coming back. We've been reading through the book of Deuteronomy in our Path Journal. Those of you who are going through the Path Journal with us, it's our chapter a day Bible reading plan for the year. We've been reading through Deuteronomy. And if you're reading with us through that, you will see over and over again, Moses is just constantly telling them, guys, all these pagan nations, all these people, like, don't intermarry with them. Don't allow them to stay in this land. You got to force them out. You got to get them out of here, because if you allow them to stay, they will lead you astray. That they will tempt you. They will cause you to stumble and to worship their gods. This is something that was from the very beginning. This isn't during the time of Elijah, right? And so Elijah's move is radical, but again, it shows us the seriousness of this issue. These idols have to be dealt with. And so again, let me ask you this question for you to wrestle with and chew on and deal with this week. What are the Baals in your life that need to be radically put to death? What are they? you may have to make some drastic decisions if you really believe that those things are a problem in your life. If it really is an idol. Let's take the little electronic devices in our pockets for a second. And the addiction that many of us have, myself included, to that little thing sometimes. What am I going to do? If that's really something that I believe that thing's going to give me happiness. If I get on and scroll Instagram today, if I get on and look at another YouTube video today, if I get on and whatever it is that you do on there, that's going to fill me up. That's going to give me joy. Like, what's the first thing half of us reach for the second we wake up in the morning? Right? I'm just using this as an example. Maybe for you, that's not an issue. But what if it is? What are you going to do about that? You're just going to keep doing the same thing you've been doing? You're going to keep allowing it to have your heart, to absorb your heart? Or are you going to say, no, something's got to change here. I might have to do something radical. Oh my goodness, I might have to get a dumb phone. I might have to get a flip phone to change this situation. Do something radical, because I'm telling you right now, it will continue to absorb your heart if you don't. That's the bottom line. That's what I want you to hear. No matter what it is, what it happens to be. And so let's put this all together. Here's what Elijah is telling them. Here's what he's telling us. With this issue of idols in our life, stop wavering, recognize God as the answer, and radically put your idols to death. That's the process. Stop wavering, recognize God is the answer and the only one who will answer, and put your idols to death. Because why? One more time, let's look at it again. Idols never answer. Idols never answer. They will never give you what you think they're going to give you. And my prayer for us today is that we would allow God to do the same work in us that he did through Elijah 3,000 years ago with the Israelite people. I want to close today with this encouragement, because some of you might be sitting here going right now, you're like, Justin, man, I got some idols in my life and I don't know how I'm going to deal with it, and I feel overwhelmed right now. Can I just encourage you with the gospel of Jesus Christ today? And this is what I cling to on the days when the idols feel overwhelming in my own life. Jesus died on the cross, came to this world, went to the cross, paid the penalty for our sin, called us back to worship of him, and over and over and over again, just like God did for the Israelites, he will continue to call us back to worship of him with grace and truth. And so what I don't want you to leave here today doing is going, man, I just feel crushed by this. No. First and foremost, what I want you to walk out of here doing is going, man, Jesus is amazing. We serve an amazing God who would forgive us over and over again, even though we've turned our hearts away from him over and over and over again. Praise God for Jesus Christ and how he does that for us. And then I want you to walk out of here and go, but because Jesus has done that for me, because of how faithful he has been to me, because he will never leave me or forsake me and will always continue to chase after me and call me back to him, you know what? From this point forward, man, I want my heart to chase after him and him alone. That's what the gospel does. It actually sets us free to do that in a way that nothing else can. And so that's my prayer for you, church. If you know Jesus, if you have the gospel, let that encourage your heart today. And if you don't, if you do not know Christ, know that today, that his love for you is so great, it is so deep. He was willing to sacrifice himself for you so that you could have right relationship with him again, so that you could make him number one. Would you do that today? That's why we're here as a church. That's why we exist, to point people to that truth. If you heard nothing else today, that's what I want you to hear.